Hey there, welcome to One Take, powered by backers. Right?
No judging.
Yeah.
No judging.
The millennials are really changing that.
Is charm. No.
All success begins with desire.
I feel like I'm on fire right now.
OMG, baby, tell them.
Hey there, welcome to One Take, powered by backers. Justin Fox, Samir, Hamadache. Hopefully, actually, I should ask you that. Did I get it right?
Yeah, that's great. Hamadache.
Hamadache, perfect. All right. Samir, thank you very much for joining me on the show today.
Nice. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited, and it's been great working with you up until now. So I'm pumped to just chill.
There you go. So let's like I just said to you, you're like unlike most of the people that I've had on the show. Probably over the past year, I've worked with you a little more than most of them. Some of them just literally get on the show. I've never met them. Don't even necessarily know what they look like before they jump on the show. You and I have worked together. We are transitioning this a little bit. We're now the guests on the show are going to be people like yourself that are working through the Backers platform. Going to be launching campaigns to obviously raise capital on the Backers platform. But let's talk a little bit about you and give you a bit of a background. So you are the founder and CEO of Forest City Synbio, which I will define that, or I'll let you define that to people. But essentially, you are a biochemist, genetics grad, both in master's and undergrad from Western University. Correct? I'll leave it at that. I think so. You are the brains behind whatever venture is going to happen, essentially.
I guess you could say that.
Okay. So let's just dive right in. Synbio. Can you define what Synbio is? I think that's probably a great place to start. What is Synbio?
Sure. Yeah. It's funny because if you ask 5 people who would identify with synthetic biology, you'd get 10 definitions back.
Okay.
But
so what's your definition of synthetic biology, right? Genetics and what you guys are doing over at Forest City.
Yeah, so usually when I give people a definition, I start by saying it's nothing new in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's a whole lot of new things.
Right.
It's basically a new generation of biotechnology that is powered by a whole bunch of new tools and new capabilities in biotechnology.
Right.
And with these powerful tools and also the accessibility of the tools, so they're becoming cheaper and easier to use and more commonplace.
Right.
There's a whole world of opportunities that's opening up, and so it's really a buzzword about that opportunity and all the exciting things that people are working on and where they see it going.
Okay, so that's let's define then let's take the best, in your opinion, definition of synthetic biology or
Sure,
synbio.
Yeah. I guess it's the design and construction of living or biological parts and systems for useful applications. So that last part is something that people find very important in this community. It's the fact that it's very application focused, and
Right.
It's all about, can we solve problems with life? Can we create value and address a lot of the big crises that we're facing today? At the same time, it's really a shift in biology and in the life sciences from a field of discovery and observation to a field of design and engineering.
Right.
And so there's a sort of a coming together of a lot of different fields, computer science, engineering, automation, as well as the humanities and the social sciences with chemistry, physics, and biology. And it's really a coming together of all these different principles and disciplines for the goal of, let's engineer life. We've learned so much about it over the last however long. Let's start building it now.
Interesting. So just for those people watching, so you're literally arguably making something out of nothing, potentially, right? Kind of, you're creating life in essence, right? And you're creating these modified versions. Now, the reason I said that word is a lot of people, and I was the same when we first started talking and just sort of listening to it. There is sort of that connotation around genetically modified organisms, right? And there's a bit of a taboo-ness to it, I think, right? Where does this fall in line with that? And, you know, the other side, which I think I want to talk about too, is sort of the concept of, you mentioned like engineering and stuff, like almost like 3D printing life, right? You're like creating like a variation of 3D printing of literally life. So how does it fit in line with that as the new age, with sort of what maybe a consumer who, you know, the average person watching this might be like, hey, that's kind of like bigger, you know, redder tomatoes, right? What exactly is it that you guys are doing? Because I think it's a lot different from that, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I guess you're kind of alluding to the GMO wave that came
Right.
before the synthetic biology wave, and how people responded to that, and
Right.
sort of the perception that that generation created around. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, or at least like any age group or generation. I'm pointing, you know, at the whole movement that was GMOs had a sort of, it introduced a whole lot of connotations to genetic engineering and
Right.
what that meant. And the nice thing about what this new era, I guess, of synthetic biology from a cultural standpoint is that it's learning from the past, and it's being very proactive in engaging, you know, like I said before, about people who come from the humanities and sociology and the social sciences, and can help us understand how is this technology going to affect the world, affect people, affect the planet, and so on.
So the
But at the same
philosophical
time,
debate's also part of it there as well, right?
very much so, yeah. So
The
for
sociology
instance,
side.
yeah, so for instance, here in Canada, with organizations like Genome Canada and the Genome Centers, they prioritize something they call GELS, which is actually kind of G for genomics, E is kind of three things. There's, if I can remember this, it's kind of economic, environmental, and ethical, I think, or something. That I may have gotten that wrong.
Yeah.
Take it with a grain of salt.
That's fine. That makes sense. Economic, ethical, and what was the third one you said? Environmental, right? Yeah, those would be three things to take into consideration for sure.
And then I think legal and societal or something like that. But to take it with a grain of salt, don't fact check me on that if you want to. But yeah, so just to say that the community is trying to get ahead of this, trying to get ahead of the debates. But on another front, on the technical side, it's really very different from what we used to do in this space. It used to be, like you said, bigger, redder tomatoes. It's like, let's take something that we already love and see if we can mess around with it and make it a little bit better.
Right.
And the amount of control and precision and you know, the tools were just not great, really. A lot of it was sort of undirected. For instance, with plants, the being able to introduce new genes to the plants, the methods available were very random. It's basically, you take a gold particle, you coat it in DNA, and you take what's called a gene gun, and you fire these gold particles at the plant tissue. And where the DNA ends up in the cell, in the genome, is totally haphazard. And it could be interrupting an important gene. It could be not even being expressed at all. You could be creating all sorts of copies of it, and you don't really know how many you're introducing. So there's very little control. The precision was kind of wild. But now we can synthesize DNA from scratch. So you literally just type up in your computer. I mean, obviously it's more sophisticated. There's tools and software and so on, but you type up your ACGT, which is basically your 0 and 1. Yeah. And you create a synthetic DNA molecule that does precisely what you designed it to do. Obviously, there's still a lot of gaps in our knowledge and understanding, and we still need to learn, for instance, how the entire DNA sequence of a cell translates into its phenotype, which basically just means what the cell ends up doing and looking like. So there's still learning to be done there in terms of how these things are, how very precise changes to DNA affect the whole organism. Right. But now we have a lot more precision and a lot more ability to do things the way we intend them to be done. And
right. So it's that sort of evolution of capability that makes it now less potentially risky. Is that to sort of summarize, right? It takes away some of the risk. I'm going to throw this out because we talked about it, but I think it's interesting for the show. I watched on Netflix, guy inject, I think it was on Netflix somewhere. And we talked about, remember we joked about it? CRISPR, you know, the guy was like ordering little vials of whatever, injecting himself, you know, for whatever reason, who knows what he was doing. He was injecting other things. Tell us about CRISPR. And obviously that's, you know, what can we put a disclaimer here? Do not try this at home, but right. Tell us a little bit about, because that's sort of one of, I guess, the applications of a way of delivering that RNA or whatever DNA into the cells, right? Through the use of CRISPR on I guess, is it on a protein or how is it delivered? And
Yeah,
what,
so
is that guy right or wrong with what he's doing, right?
Well, that last one's a hard question. But so CRISPR, just a little bit of background, I guess. It originally, what CRISPR naturally is it's a defense system for bacteria against foreign DNA, essentially viruses and pathogens that they have to fight against and protect themselves against. And the way it works is the bacteria have been exposed to some foreign genetic information, and they learn to recognize it. And the way they learn to recognize it is by storing little snippets of it in their own genome. So the bacteria, let's say E. coli, has detected that there's this pathogen that it needs to be aware of and be defended against. And so it records a little piece of the foreign DNA in its own genome. And CRISPR is really, it's using that sort of reference of what the pathogen is, and using it to very precisely detect the pathogen when it's present and cut it. So the default function, so to speak, of CRISPR is to cut whatever it detects matches the target sequence. And so the protein that does that, there's a protein and a piece of RNA. The protein is called Cas9. So sometimes you'll see people calling it CRISPR-Cas9. And then there's the RNA component, which is basically, it's that same marker, that little snippet of DNA that we recorded in the past, that's translated into RNA, which is kind of a sister molecule to DNA. And Cas9 is connected to that RNA piece. It goes to the foreign DNA, the pathogen that it's trying to kill, uses the RNA as like a reference. So it's kind of like a control F function. It's looking for where's that RNA going to match up. And when it detects a match, it cuts it at that location with the Cas9 protein. That's what the protein does. It cuts DNA. So that's kind of like the default, like natural application of CRISPR-Cas9, I guess. There's a whole bunch of different proteins. Instead of Cas9, there's Cas12, there's Cas whatever, and they all do different things. And people, bioengineers, have taken it even further, and now they've added, so you know how I said it's like a control F. Instead of going, you know, control F and then control X by cutting the target, you could do a control V and paste
into the
paste in a
spot.
gene at that spot, right? Or you could do all sorts of interesting things. You could modify very specific letters in the DNA. You could turn on a gene or turn it off, and so on. So there's a lot of interesting things that could be done with CRISPR. And then the question of, can you just inject yourself with CRISPR and have it do things in your body? Well, obviously there's a lot of applications that you could probably already imagine of why you would want to do that. So for instance, if somebody has cancer,
diseases
and they want
of various sorts, yeah.
Exactly. If you want to kill a virus, remove a virus from somebody's DNA, from their cells, or treat a genetic disease, or you know, correct a mutation that's underlying a cancer. So there's a lot of different interesting applications, obviously, but there's a lot of challenges. And one of the big ones is, how do you actually get that protein and that piece of RNA to the very specific cell, and cells, usually there's more than one, where you want it to actually do what it needs to do. And usually it's not the whole body. Usually you're trying to target a very specific tissue. And there's a whole lot of challenges associated with that delivery, and making sure that the delivery is precise and controlled and reliable and so on.
So let me ask you a question. I just thought of this. You just sort of alluded to it. Is that potentially a cure for cancer?
Well, there's a lot of work on that, obviously.
Like, is that obviously something people are studying? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of exciting stuff in that space. I'm not knowledgeable enough to start listing off examples, but I can tell you for sure that this is something that's a very active area of research.
Because obviously cancers, you know, typically, I mean, obviously if it's metastasized or it's all over the body, it's hard. But like if it's just one kind of, you know, centrally located tumor, if you will, right? You could arguably target that potentially. I mean, obviously you're saying people are studying it. Interesting. So other thing that I think you mentioned before, and this may or may not have been, is the vaccine side of mRNA, right? That's sort of the Canadian, one of the versions of the vaccine for COVID, right?
Yeah.
That is utilizing mRNA and injecting that. Is that using something similar to a CRISPR, or is that completely different, or what's the approach there? and if we're going way off base, just bring me back in line and we can talk about, like, I think it's really cool, the whole space, the ability to literally 3D print DNA and change, a lot of things. Obviously, humans may be the last to be changed, but I think there's other aspects, right, of life that you're focusing on the agricultural side as well, right? So, but as far as the vaccine, is that similar, or can you explain that to people, the mRNA?
Yeah, so that's really exciting stuff because it's a very relevant application of synthetic biology, and it's interesting. I always remark how if you asked an everyday person maybe 2 years ago, I guess, if they knew what mRNA was, chances are they'd never heard of it before. But now everyone has heard of mRNA,
Right.
mRNA vaccines. It's
I
similar.
actually did know. I
Okay.
will say I took biology and throughout genetics into university a little bit, but yeah.
Okay, now
So,
maybe
yeah.
that was a bit presumptuous of me to think of.
But you are right though. You are right that a lot of people may or may not understand DNA in general, right? mRNA or DNA or any of that, right? You talk about the ACGT, right? People would not know what that means, right? But yeah, so tell us about mRNA.
Yeah, so mRNA stands for messenger RNA, and how I said it's like a sister molecule to DNA in sort of basic molecular biology. It's you have a sequence of information going from DNA to mRNA to proteins, and so this isn't directly related to CRISPR, I guess, but what is common obviously is the fact that both of them involve RNA.
Right.
And in the case of these mRNA vaccines, you are basically delivering the message that encodes the proteins that you want to train your body to be able to detect when it comes to COVID. So the way traditional vaccines worked is you would actually deliver an attenuated or a dead version of the virus to the patient, and then that gives the immune system something to train itself against. In this case, instead of injecting the whole virus and hoping that it's attenuated sufficiently and killed sufficiently to not cause any symptoms, you would just take the proteins of interest that you're trying to get your immune system to recognize, and you deliver the mRNA version of that. Once the mRNA is in your cells, your body knows how to read it and translate it into protein, and then it can train itself to recognize and protect itself from those proteins.
So it's deoxyribonucleic acid, right? And ribonucleic acid. Is it then monoribonucleic acid or messenger ribonucleic acid? It is messenger? Okay. That's the only part I didn't know. I do remember some things. It was like we're talking 20 years ago, but yeah, so I play dumb because I don't really want to have to look like I know anything. It's better that way. Okay, so tell us a little bit about you and your experience. Obviously, Forest City, you have the technical background. You've been in the space. Tell us a little bit about, so obviously you started Forest City SynBio. Tell us a little bit about your adventure over the past, I think, 2-3 years as you've been sort of building up to where you are now, and your experience as, I would say, going from the lab to the business, to the what would you call it, the I don't know,
the dark side.
Yeah. Whoa. No, from the lab to the boardroom, let's say, right? That was what I was trying to, how's that transition been? Are you enjoying it? Tell us a little bit about what Forest City is, what inspired you to kind of approach it this way, and where maybe, we could talk a little bit about where you're going in the future. But yeah, tell us a little bit about Forest City. For those who aren't watching, Forest City is in reference to London, Ontario. I'm not even sure why it's called Forest City, but maybe was it in the middle of the forest and then they just plunked it there? Is that okay? There you go. You learn something new every day. So, okay. So tell us a little bit about Forest City SynBio.
Yeah, so I guess myself a little bit. I studied genetics and biochemistry at Western University, which is here in the Forest City. And then that's where I got exposed to synthetic biology. It was introduced to me by a scientist who later became my graduate thesis supervisor.
Okay.
And he also did his PhD at Western before going to California and working with a lot of the pioneers in synthetic biology.
Okay.
And so he was sort of coming back and bringing all this exciting stuff from his postdoc experience down in California. And he was giving a talk about his work on minimal genomes, which are basically cells that have totally artificial genomes. So the DNA is completely artificial. It's synthetic and it's not coming from any other natural source. And it's minimized, meaning that anything that's not essential for life has been removed from the genome.
Okay.
And these experiments were run by a lab called the J. Craig Venter Institute. You may have heard of Craig Venter. He's like one of the...
That's a really good name if you're in VC for sure, right?
Exactly. He's one of the big names.
Joe Capitalist, right? Craig Venture and Joe Capitalist, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
They formed that was the first VC firm.
Is it? I didn't know about this.
I'm joking.
Okay. All right.
Anyways, yeah.
But yeah, so he's known from back when they first sequenced the human genome. He was
Okay.
one of the leaders of that.
When was that? Just for people watching, like I historically, obviously the mapping of the genome was the start. Was that sort of 80s, maybe early 90s? 90s?
I think it was done in 2003.
Oh shit! So it's not even that. Like we're talking only less than 20 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, it's all very new.
It started though, right? Like it took a while for them to go through the process. Is that why it seems like it started maybe 80s or 90s, but finished sort of 2003?
Yeah, it's crazy how much it cost and how long it took, and now we could do it in a day for like approaching $100, close to, I think it's in the thousands now, but
really.
Yeah,
so like I mean, it's like computers, right? What used to be a giant warehouse full of blocks of computers is now in arguably our phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's similar. Okay, interesting. So 2003. So fast forward.
Right. So my supervisor worked at this institute. His name is Bogomil, and he came back to Western and he was giving a talk about these minimal genomes, and it just blew my mind just to see how far this has come. And so that got me hooked on synthetic biology, and I was still an undergrad at the time and didn't really have any opportunities to try my hand at it just yet. But I was sort of involved in some leadership stuff and community stuff, so I did what I'm used to doing. And so what we did was I worked with Bogomil and some others, and we created a little advocacy campaign at Western to get the university to create an undergraduate degree program in this field. So a lot of students were really interested in it, and they said we'd love to be studying it. But
so has that started? When did that start? Yeah.
So that started when did it start? 2020, and the first class graduated this year or last year, I believe. Something like that. But it is.
So it's like a postgrad or like a master's program or
undergrad.
It was undergrad. Okay.
Yeah, and they are working on some postgrad as well. There's some classes, and there's obviously an active research groups, but I don't think there's a strict program yet. Yeah, so that's kind of how I got into this, and that campaign got the attention of, he was a PhD student at the time at U of T, and he asked me to help him build what's now SynBio Canada. And that's a community organization just trying to bring more awareness to the space and get people to meet each other, connect with each other around this topic. And it's mainly for students and scientists, and that's a nonprofit there. But Forest City SynBio came out of, I've always had a passion for entrepreneurship. I always thought it's really cool to, sort of pave your own path and create something brand new and solve big problems. And the nice thing about synthetic biology is that it's ripe for entrepreneurship, and there's all sorts of great innovations that are just waiting to be created and built and tested. But and there's a lot of people who are well trained, especially in Canada. There's great training across the country in this space, and a lot of excitement, a lot of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, but not a whole lot of support for them, especially from the private sector, very specifically in this space, being able to find a lab, find mentors, find investors, and take your idea and turn it into something that you can actually pitch to, like more traditional VCs, more traditional investors. So what Forest City SynBio is trying to do is fill that gap, and what we're doing, Forest City, we're doing it here in London. We're building a lab in collaboration with a lot of local partners and partners outside of the area as well. and it will be a co-working space with room for up to 24 teams. So for the people who are, in the space, there's going to be 20 BSL1, so biosafety level 1 workstations, and 4 biosafety level 2 workstations, which basically just means in BSL1, you're basically working with bacteria and yeast and just like standard stuff. In BSL2, you're working with more interesting things like viruses and mammalian cells and making pharmaceutical products and so on. And then where backers comes in is our investment model. So we are planning to invest in these companies in exchange for a small share of their equity, and we will also be providing them with a comprehensive program that develops them as founders and as entrepreneurs, as well as their company as a business, and helps them develop their technical side and so on. And so we're looking to give them hopefully $250,000 at the start of the program. And part of that money, we're talking about roughly 50% of it coming from equity crowdfunding. So that's where backers comes in. I'm sure you've talked to your audience about this a lot.
We talk a lot about it. I mean, it's all so I mean, we don't really need to get into that side. So you'll be obviously using the backers platform to raise capital for both Forest City, and then which you will then utilize however you utilize it. But then also the opportunity would be for the companies or the ideas or these ventures that are going through your platform to also be able to raise capital through the backers platform. They all know all about that, so that's fine. So when you guys launch, be sure to check out Forest City SynBio. Everyone watching will get notified of that, and we'll probably have you back on. We'll do a little launch ceremony and all that stuff. But one of the quick things that I think is interesting that you mentioned there, I'd love to talk more about your sort of business model. And I think this is why we do what we do. Obviously I'm a lot less technically in a very specific space, but it's really, I sort of attempted several opportunities successfully, not successfully, various levels of success, but funding was always an issue. And I think one thing that you also brought up is also, it's not so much funding, it's the mentorship or the just knowing, it's like G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, right? It's literally like knowing what to do, right? Like funding is one aspect, but there's so many different things that, if you're, especially if, and don't get me wrong, but like if you're very technically sound in something, right? You're very good at whatever that is, but there are so many other aspects of running a business that either you maybe aren't aware of, you don't want to do. So tell us a little bit about what FCSB is going to be able to provide to those entrepreneurs who are actually scientists, right? Who are trying to become entrepreneurs, so that they can transition, right? Because I think that's literally the $1 million question, the $1 billion question is, what is the secret sauce? There's a lot of accelerators, there's a lot of incubators. You've mentioned, we've talked about it. There's a lot of organizations similar to what you're doing, kind of globally, right? So what is it that you guys have kind of, maybe I want to make it easy for you to answer, so it's not like, what's sort of maybe the boiled down version of what you think are the important, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 things. 10's probably a lot, but let's say 3 to 5 things that you think are the priorities that you're going to, you're going to let them do the science, right? That's a given. You'll have the sort of the facilities, but what are some of the other aspects that you want to really be able to provide them with? Funding is another. So we'll leave the science and the funding aside. Give us sort of the, I watched a Simon Sinek thing today about soft skills versus human skills versus hard skills, right? But I don't think that really plays into it. But what are some of the other things that you want to provide them so that they can be successutal?
Yeah, no,
long question.
Very
very long-winded question. Sorry.
I think that's what is a lot of people, when they think about this kind of business model, they think about the money and the investment. It's really you're going to get $250,000. It's so much more than that, like you said. Right. And so what's interesting about our story is that we are entrepreneurs as obviously, but we haven't gone through, I guess, what you might call the established path that's been developing over the last couple decades of, you go through an incubator and you pitch to an accelerator like Y Combinator or someone else, and there's a program or curriculum, you get connected up and they tell you how to do everything, and then you sort of come out and you've learned, and now you need to take what you've learned and do it yourself basically, and grow beyond it.
Right.
So we didn't have that for ourselves. I didn't have that. I didn't go through an accelerator or anything like that. So we had to learn a lot of these things ourselves and make mistakes and explore and step outside the comfort zone and so on. So a lot of what we're hoping to relay to the founders that we are going to support are the things that we learned the hard way, essentially. But then also we've established a good network. So I started this project in 2018. And since then, it's been a lot of networking and ecosystem building and finding the right people who can provide the right supports for founders. So we've built a fairly strong ecosystem with a lot of service providers and partners who would provide these founders with everything from personal development, leadership training, how to be a good team member, team leader, manager, sales training, and sort of those key business skills that are essential. So I mean, we both know Joe O'Neill and his practice, and they're going to be a partner in this and providing their services and programs. And then there's supports from financial planning, project management. There's intelligence research, so consulting on, so the founders are going to have access to a team of expert researchers that can help them with their market research, understanding their customer and estimating the size of their market and so on. And also from the technical side, from the scientific side, we're going to provide them with access to all sorts of technical advisors and mentors, scientists and residents that they can ask questions to frequently, as well as partners that can help them with figuring out their downstream processing, which is a very big challenge in this space. It's all hard, but relatively easier to get to the point where you have a bench scale, your bacteria are turning blue, let's say, and you're like, okay, it works. We've got what we wanted to produce. And then taking it to the next step and actually purifying and isolating the blue stuff, whatever it happens to be. And it's always unique to every product that you're trying to produce, and you have to have the right infrastructure, the right process, and so on. So we have, connections that can help these companies potentially understand what they need to do and get ahead of those challenges before they, imminently have to solve big problems.
Right. Is that sort of the go-to-market stuff? Like, are you looking at more like what the strategy? So now they've got the science. Now, how do you take it to the application and then get the application to wherever it's going? Is that?
Yeah, so there's two key target outcomes that every startup will have in the program. One is a proof of concept of your idea. Right. So a lot of them so the startups that we're hoping to bring in or plan to bring in will likely just have an idea. They might have some experimental work, perhaps from school. And they have a in principle demonstration that this idea could work, but they still need to actually build the bench scale prototype, so to speak. And it takes a very long time to get to your minimal viable product. This isn't software, but you can get closer to it. And so they're going to be expected to build a proof of concept that takes them one step closer to their minimal viable product. And at the same time, the second outcome is a pitch. So you need to have a solid pitch for the end of the program, whether they are looking to raise money strictly from traditional investors and VCs or crowdfunding on your platform. So they're going to have to set themselves up for success on your platform. Right. And then in terms of the go-to-market strategy, so all of these, the downstream processing and the mentorship and so on that I mentioned is to help them with developing their product development strategy and how they're going to get that on shelves and so on. But then we're also helping them with the marketing of their actual brand and developing their brand and figuring out how they're going to deliver their message effectively and so on. And one of our partners is a marketing firm that's very strong in this space. And so they would have at their disposal expert marketing professionals.
Humanity, right?
Exactly.
Humanity, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I was on the call with them. They sounded pretty great at what they did. So that's, yeah. Okay, cool. So let's, I don't want to keep you all day here. I definitely really appreciate it.
This is a lot of fun. I'm loving it.
I'll end. I have a couple things. So sort of more of like a advice you'd give to yourself. But before we get to that, I just have one last question. So I know I've heard you talk about sort of and you just mentioned it there. Sort of the the MVP is usually a lot longer to get to in something like this. Like what is I want to leave this question as open as possible so you can answer it. What is sort of the typical timeline of someone has the idea, comes to you, maybe applies, starts your program to, they're, as you just said, sort of on the shelf, although I know that's maybe only in one kind of instance that's the end game, but like, what's that? Give us sort of a timeline of what that would look like.
It can really vary, and it really depends on which vertical you're in. If you're making a pharmaceutical product, it's going to take much longer than if you're making, a food ingredient or something of that sort. And
you guys are focused mostly on agro, though, right? Not the pharmaceutical side.
Yeah. So our long-term plan is to capture as much of the space as possible, but
So
we're going to start with food and agriculture because that's
Right.
the strength of the region we're in.
Right.
So the nice thing about synthetic biology is that the time to market is decreasing quickly compared to what it's been
Right.
in the past, but it still takes some time. So on average, we're talking about 5 years for sort of small chemicals, biomanufacturing, food ingredients, things like that. And it could be up to 10, could be longer years if you're doing something more sophisticated.
Interesting. So yeah, just like you said, mapping the genome took 20 years. You can now do it in a day,
Right.
for $100, right? So maybe the process will expedite a little bit. Okay, cool. So yeah, again, very, very glad you joined me here today. Appreciate that. Let's just dive into a little self-reflection. So put on your self-reflection hat. If there was something that you could, and obviously your partner too. I mean, I think we're gonna have Shay on here as well, hopefully at some point in the near future. If there's something maybe you, that I usually say one word, that you could go back and sort of say to yourself, a younger you, piece of advice, what would that one word be?
Mindfulness, perhaps.
Mindfulness. There you go.
Yeah. It's
let's all take a deep breath and be very mindful. Let's be in the place. Let's be in the moment. I agree. Why do you say that? What, like, do you find you're more mindful now than you were, say, a few years ago, or as when you were younger, or why do you say that?
Well, I'm trying to be, and I think it just took me too long to recognize the importance of it and develop an appreciation for it. And now,
just for the record, everyone watching, he's like 23, so 24. So you've got time. Everyone out there is watching. Yeah, you've got lots of time. So,
but it's one of those things that once you sort of, go down the rabbit hole, you're like, why didn't I start this earlier? I've wasted so much of my life just.
Again, how old are you again?
24.
20. Wasted your life. You're literally, I don't want to say how old I am, but I'm almost 20 years older. So do the math. So you've got you've got a lot of time. Life is long. You're still really early on, and I mean, obviously I wish you the best of luck. We'll be working there alongside you, helping you guys out. But I think you guys are onto something. It's, sort of, it's almost a very specific and slightly more focused on the science side version of what we're doing, right? You guys are bringing in the companies, giving them the space, mentoring them, that incubator, accelerator, and giving them access to that actual physical lab space, whereas we're kind of the sort of middle part and then the funding side, right? So I think it's really cool. Obviously an investment in, just like in backers is an investment in all the companies, an investment in FCSB is literally an investment in all the different technologies that will go through, all the different studies and research that will go through, right? Hopefully some of them, at the end, right, in that 5-10 year window are, as you said, on the shelf. Although I don't think they become actual necessarily whole food products. It's more like in a part of, right? Part of the ecosystem. Awesome. Well, is there anything, I mean, let's obviously people want to connect with you. Where can they connect with you?
So you could find us, find our website, fcsb.ca. We're also on LinkedIn for now. We're still rolling out our social media and online presence.
Okay.
But you could, I'm always, I'm happy to talk to anyone if they're interested in learning more, asking questions.
Right.
Samir at forestcitysynbio.ca.
Okay.
And I just want to close by saying, it's been great working with you, Justin. I'm really excited to see where this collaboration goes. It's like you said, I think there's a lot of overlaps in what we're doing, and it's a good fit.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And I was going to joke, and I appreciate you guys kind of jumping on board with us as well. I was going to say though, no TikTok. You're young. Are you not right in that wheelhouse for TikTok?
It's never been something that I got into.
No, you're probably about 4 years older for I think it's like teenagers right now, right?
Yeah, I just missed
missed the TikTok boat. Maybe are you Snapchat? Do you use Snapchat?
I did use Snapchat through my teen years, but not anymore.
No, I've actually never used Snapchat. That's the one I've never used. But TikTok, I had it for a bit. Facebook, obviously, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. But yeah, you guys should definitely get into TikTok. I think that'd be funny. You should talk to Humanity about getting you guys a TikTok account and doing stuff in the lab and just fun stuff with all the scientists. I think it put maybe a humanity spin on the human side of science, right?
I'm gonna make sure they see this, but yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Anyway, right. Shout outs to Humanity. You guys are doing good.
Thank you.
Anyway, Samir and we're gonna have Shay on here, but you guys are awesome. Really like what you guys are doing. Samir, I really appreciate you joining me today. Everyone else, this is One Take, powered by backers, Justin Fox, Samir Hamadache. I will see you guys again very soon, probably tomorrow, actually. Hey there, welcome to One Take, powered by backers. Right?
No judging.
Yeah.
No judging.
And the millennials are really changing that.
Is charm. No.
All success begins with desire.
I feel like I'm on fire right now.
OMG, baby.